really started paying attention then. Can you give us a little insight on the different districts and how it's going to affect residents?
Yeah, so this is going to be a fun piece. Because in order to do this, there is not a single zoning classification that survives this process. Every zoning classification changes, and that means that we're going to have to effectively rezone every piece of property in the city. That means in the next couple of months, as this moves forward, every resident will get a notice, and they'll be invited to a public hearing to discuss whether they want their property to be rezoned. In some of those areas, that change in zone won't mean much to people. If you're currently in a residential area and you've got a single-family home and we're going to rezone you to one of our new single-family specific zones, all that means is that your use is going to be more protected. It's less likely that you're going to get a multifamily infill project coming in next door because that'll be inconsistent with the new zone. In other areas, it may be more dramatic. If you're in commercial areas or you're in an area that wanted to transition to commercial or multifamily, this might be a little more challenging because we're going to provide, again, some zones that are discrete. It's either single family or it's multifamily. It's not both. And that's where we have to go out into the community and take a look at where things are going, take a look at our comprehensive plan, and try and get the zoning right. One of the unique things about our community that I've seen since I've been here for the last year is that almost every project starts with a rezone. If our zoning was right, that wouldn't be necessary. So we're going to try and reduce the requirement for rezones, not only to make it more effective, but that means that we've done a better job of zoning it in the first place. We're also going to add our new zone, which is mixed use. That allows us to have residential and commercial operating together. That's a new opportunity that doesn't exist under our current classification, at least not easily. We're going to have the downtown zone for the downtown area, which has some specific standards about landscaping and open space that fit the downtown density and environment. And then we've also got some changes, as I mentioned earlier, that are specific to commercial. So we've got some new commercial and industrial classifications that really try to segregate our uses more carefully so that we can try to reduce the potential for having inconsistent uses right next to each other.
Can you explain, can you give us an example of how the districts are outlined in the document?
Yes, this slide actually looks at the way we've defined our zones in the new document, and you can see we've worked hard to try and make it as simple and clear as possible. This document has a lot more tables and diagrams, things that didn't exist in the previous document, which was all text. So here you can actually take a look at what is the maximum height. It's right there in the center. You can find it. It's in the same place in every zoning classification. So if you know where you're looking for it and you want to look at each, you're going to find it in the same place. So just as far as an ease of use, this is formatted to make that possible. The other thing we've included is we've included a number of diagrams in there as well. So not only do you get the text, you get some pictures. And the pictures provide you some typical kind of development that would fit. And so you get an idea of what kind of things are going to be acceptable in that zone. And it makes it easier for people who don't do this every day and aren't used to interpreting legal language, an opportunity to make this much more accessible to them so they understand what these zones mean. The nice thing about this is that when it's also done, we're going to put this in an electronic format available on our website and also on a small disk so that there'll be hyperlinks. So anytime there's a cross-reference, you click on it, boom. Anytime something's defined, it'll be underlined, you click on it, you get the definition. So again, it's going to make the code much more accessible to not only the professional, but to the layman as well. Now let's talk a little about standards, which is the next section. And standards is really the look and feel of development. It's okay, you're going to do a commercial development. What does that mean? And what kind of requirements are we going to layer on top of that development? One thing is that if you look around our streetscape and our commercial areas, what's missing is the green. You're missing the trees, the shrubs, the grass that you would find in many other areas. You can take a look at most of our commercial areas and they're sea and asphalt. This would require, there are new standards regarding landscaping that require that to be broken up so that we get planted islands, planted peninsulas, pedestrian ways, so that we really are trying to create an environment that is more environmentally sensitive, cooler, and also more pedestrian friendly so that people will walk and feel safe. Parking, one of the new things we've added, not only do we have the standard parking requirements, which are minimum parking, but we also have maximum parking in areas of commercial and industrial. Lots of times it's easier when you're doing a development to truly just lay out a sea of asphalt. That's the easiest way to develop the property. It's low maintenance. That's not, however, the best way for you to take care of your sustainability and your impervious surface, etc. So we've put in place a maximum parking standard. Now, that doesn't mean that if you truly have a use that demands a lot of parking, you can't create it. That's why we have that alternative parking plan that can be submitted to actually demonstrate that you either need more, or in some cases, maybe you need less. And we're willing to look at both of those through an administrative process. Also, lighting. Being close to Fort Bragg, we've heard increasing feedback about the need and desirability of a nice dark night sky as they do nighttime operations, if they're helicopters or planes, etc. So they need to keep that night sky dark. And also, as from a quality of life perspective, everybody hates it when your neighbor's spotlight shines in your bedroom window. It doesn't make the density that we're developing as a community comfortable. So this requires lights to be shielded so they focus down. It defines light trespass so that you don't shine the light over the neighbors. It actually requires you to control your light. And in some cases, it actually requires you to turn the lights off when the business is done so that we actually get darkness at night. Now, some of the other standards we're looking at is, as mentioned a couple times, it's about compatibility of uses, putting uses next to each other and making them comfortable that way. To try and improve that, we have a new requirement which we're calling transitional use. Sorry about that. Transitional use. So basically, if you're transitioning from one use to another, you're going to need to be more context sensitive. So if you're putting a business, a neighborhood business, in a residential area, then we're going to require you to build that business in a form that looks more like a residential structure rather than a tilt-up square big box structure. The signing is required different, the height is a little bit lower. So basically, you transition into the change in use to try and mitigate that impact on the adjacent use. We've got some requirements for additional buffers if necessary, and also, again, as I said, a compatible form. The trade-off there is that if we do this right, there should be less requirement, again, for your conditional use permits. And a lot of things we do today through conditional use permits is just this. If you're going to put the neighborhood business in the residential area, you got to give us a buffer, and the buffer's not strictly required. Well, now the buffer is strictly required. So there's no need to truly go to the council and get it conditioned. We can require it administratively. Another piece that's new is connectivity. And this is really about how we ensure that there's good transportation connections between neighborhoods. Currently, if you look at our community, we have a lot of basically developed nodes that hang off of our arterials. There isn't really a lot of through connections. And I have a little bit of a presentation on that later. But this has standards that require us to break up big blocks to try and provide pedestrian access. And really it's about creating development that has a scale that people are comfortable walking or riding a bike. And also that it has the connections that will allow us to have an efficient flow of transportation and also access for emergency services and other services.